It's never dull in Palm Beach County. We have some of the most famous people in the country or the world living here in our backyard.
This is my county, this is my town. And catching criminals, I enjoy it.
This case began back in March of 2020.
The coronavirus pandemic shuts down schools, sporting events, and businesses.
And at the time, everyone was preoccupied with the coronavirus. Lockdowns had started. Gretchen Anthony was a resident of a well-to-do community in Jupiter, Florida, right here in Palm Beach County.
I met David and Gretchen Anthony several years ago at a local gym here. The first thing that you noticed about her, just big blue eyes and a giant smile, blonde hair, tan, athletic. David's a very attractive man, very charming. He had a big smile as well. There was magic there, and the energy between them was amazing.
Local officials issued an order not to leave your home unless absolutely necessary.
Gretchen Anthony starts to send text messages to friends and family members stating that she has been diagnosed with the coronavirus. And she describes it as being an acute case.
A serious case?
Yes. They're very concerned. They've only talked to her via text. No one ever spoke with Gretchen on the phone, and she never answered her phone.
It would go to voicemail.
Yes. So efforts were made to speak with her spouse.
So there's a dual track here. Where is Gretchen Anthony and where is her husband, David Anthony?
Yes, neither one can be found.
Police did a welfare check of Gretchen Anthony. And what they learned was disturbing.
So this is where the investigation began. Investigators were approached by a neighbor. She heard a blood-curdling scream.
Something horribly nefarious had happened.
This case really hit differently. I mean, we are talking about someone who is a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend. All I wanted to do was to be able to find her. And I wanted to find her alive.
And so the chase was on.
Back in March 2020, friends and family of Gretchen Anthony were alarmed when they began receiving texts from her saying she had tested positive for coronavirus.
You know, the news is saying it's serious.
The town of Palm Beach announced a state of emergency.
And then all of a sudden numbers are being reported and people are dying.
The number of confirmed cases continues to grow with 299.
It was hard for Gretchen Anthony's friends, like Kelly Hanna, to picture her dying of anything, much less this frightening virus. At 51 years old, Gretchen was a picture of fitness.
She worked out at the gym very hard. She took her health very seriously. Gretchen is someone who is tremendously heart-centered. She's just radiant and just a very caring, beautiful spirit.
But above all else, she was a devoted mother to her 12-year-old daughter. Gretchen was raising her child in this house in Jupiter, Florida, while sharing custody with an ex-husband.
Gretchen's daughter was her world. She was everything to her.
Gretchen Mixon, an assistant state's attorney for Palm Beach County, got involved in Gretchen's case early on.
There was nothing that Gretchen wouldn't do for her daughter. She hated being away from her.
After her divorce, friends say Gretchen fell in love with David Anthony. The two met at a local gym where he was a trainer.
D.E. Anthony here. Don't forget the 90-minute workout coming this Sunday.
Was he kind of a rock star at the gym?
Oh, he was the young, hot trainer for sure.
He has a huge presence.
David was a popular trainer at a gym owned by Tabitha Hopkins.
Nice job, you guys. Loving your hustle.
She says he brought in lots of new members.
He was intelligent, well-spoken. He was charming.
She didn't have to tell anybody that there was an attraction there. There was absolute sparks. There was magic there. No question about it.
That attraction soon led to the couple getting married at an Elvis chapel in Las Vegas in 2015.
They seemed like the happiest couple ever.
Did you feel like she'd found the man of her dreams?
Absolutely. David, in all appearances, was a phenomenal step-parent. She called him bonus dad.
But friends say the couple's dream life came apart in late 2019 when they separated and David moved out of their home.
It kind of sounded like they both lost themselves a little bit, and they were searching more for their own self-identity.
Now, Gretchen's inner circle was dealing with a potential life or death situation.
And then all of a sudden, there's bizarre cell phone messages.
Over several days, starting on March 23rd, friends and family received a series of texts from Gretchen, who said she was at home in quarantine. She sent this one to her daughter, who was staying with her ex-husband. Good morning. Tested positive for coronavirus early this morning. That means I have to stay here for at least 2 weeks. Her daughter replied, okay, I really hope you get better. Gretchen Mixon says there were multiple texts from Gretchen's phone over the next 3 days, describing her deteriorating condition.
I consulted with the virus screening hotline and admitted myself into the Jupiter Medical Center's emergency room.
So this is serious stuff. What does the family do with these texts?
The family finds the text messages that they're getting from Gretchen to be worrisome, alarming.
What disturbed everyone receiving these texts is that no one, not even Gretchen's daughter, had received a phone call from her.
There's so many things that are so wrong.
Including these texts, claiming that she'd been transferred to an off-site medical facility being run directly by the CDC in Belle Glade, more than an hour away in Central Florida. But there's a problem.
There is no CDC facility in Belle Glade, Florida.
So this text message, allegedly from Gretchen's own phone, apparently was not sent by Gretchen.
It definitely was not sent by Gretchen.
Dave Ehrenberg, the state attorney for Palm Beach County, agrees.
Clearly, whoever had sent those text messages were trying to take advantage of this pandemic, of the fear out there, trying to exploit the situation.
So things were not adding up, and things were not adding up very quickly.
The family, along with friends, made the decision to reach out to law enforcement to do a welfare check on Gretchen Anthony.
I need to get help for my friend that's missing. I don't know how to put into words, but I know she's in very grave danger right now.
Jupiter Police Detective Jared Henderson caught the case on the night shift.
We reached out to the Jupiter Medical Center, and they did not have a record of Gretchen Anthony being a patient at their facility during that time period.
So all of a sudden, this is getting serious.
Yeah, that's a huge concern of mine.
Desperate for clues, police checked out the Jupiter Medical Center's parking lot. They hit pay dirt.
Gretchen Anthony's Mini Cooper was recovered in the parking lot of Jupiter Medical Center.
Detective Kennerson says what they found inside Gretchen's car was worrisome. Her purse sitting in plain sight.
I think a woman normally carries their purse with them.
If Gretchen Anthony is not in a facility, in a hospital anywhere being treated for COVID, if she doesn't have COVID, then where is Gretchen?
That was the million-dollar question. No one knew where Gretchen was.
"5 days had passed since anyone had seen Gretchen Anthony. Jupiter police investigators were determined to find her, so they canvassed her neighborhood wearing body cameras looking for clues. They were stunned when a resident approached them to say that early on the morning of Saturday, March 21st, she heard something terrifying.
I heard a really serious woman scream, like just screaming, like she was being attacked. And then I heard her scream, "No." And then I heard something about "it hurts, stop it." The scream was really serious.
Did this woman call 911?
She did not. Some people are apprehensive about calling the police.
When you heard that story, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking that something definitely happened at Gretchen Anthony's home Saturday morning.
Officers became even more concerned when another neighbor told them he later noticed a soapy substance flowing from underneath Gretchen's garage door.
Somebody was in there cleaning.
That's what I take from that. We discovered that her entrance door that leads from her patio into her garage, that door was locked and it had the key broken off in the deadbolt.
Could Gretchen be inside? Investigators wasted no time finding out.
They forced entry into the garage, and there was no Gretchen inside. However, they noticed that there was a strong, pungent smell of a cleaning agent in the garage.
With body cameras rolling, investigators searched the home several times. They found evidence suggesting a violent struggle. A broken picture frame, shards of glass on Gretchen's bed, and a stained towel.
There was a piece of cloth that had what is referred to as BLS, a blood-like substance on it.
They got a huge break when they discovered neighbors had taken photos of a black Nissan pickup truck parked near Gretchen's home after the terrifying screams.
And who owns a black Nissan pickup truck?
David Anthony.
David Anthony, Gretchen's estranged husband.
His vehicle was there that morning.
Investigators learned from friends and family that Gretchen had filed for divorce in February of 2020, and David had moved in with his mother. That's when David's former boss, Tabitha Hopkins, says he became increasingly unstable.
He regressed behavior-wise, slowly became more hard to manage.
Gretchen's family told investigators she worried about her safety after the separation and had security cameras installed throughout her home and garage.
Who was she afraid of?
I was told that she had the cameras installed because David had returned to her home after he had left.
After they'd separated?
That's correct.
Kennerson discovered those cameras had been removed from the walls, possibly to destroy incriminating evidence. But he learned that while the cameras were gone, the images they once recorded could be recovered from the cloud.
And we sent a search warrant to her camera provider.
It is believed that this could potentially be the best piece of evidence at this point that could give us some direction as to where is Gretchen Anthony.
While they waited for that crucial evidence, investigators scrambled to find out just what David Anthony knew about Gretchen's disappearance. They went to look for him at his mother's home, again with body cameras rolling.
Jupiter Police. Hello. Hi. Hi, Jupiter Police. Sorry to bother you.
David's mom said she too had received a concerning text from Gretchen.
Gretchen's been in touch with me because she's in the CDC center. She has the virus.
Okay, what CDC center is she at?
I don't know. She texted me this morning and said she was in there. I have the text. Would you like to see it?
I would love to, thank you.
All right, no problem. Okay.
When officers asked her where her son was, they became alarmed.
He had said he was going to Costa Rica.
David's mother told them that he packed up his truck, and on Tuesday, March 24th, 3 days after Gretchen disappeared, he grabbed his dog Kobe and hit the road.
Once they know that he is attempting to flee the country, he definitely becomes a suspect. They are very suspicious of him.
Adding to their suspicion, what they discovered on the video retrieved from the Jupiter Medical Center parking lot, where Gretchen's car was found.
There was security footage that showed Gretchen Anthony's Mini Cooper pulling into a parking space, and there is a tall figure walking away from her vehicle. David Anthony is about 6'7", 6'8".
And does that look like somebody who could be 6'7", 6'8"?
Absolutely.
Investigators were convinced David Anthony was somehow involved in Gretchen's disappearance. Now, tracking Gretchen's cell phone could be the key to finding David.
They find that Gretchen's phone is hanging off a tower in the area of Pensacola, Florida.
That's like 600 miles away.
Yes, her phone is on the move.
There's a lot of moving parts here, right? So we're trying to still answer the question, where is Gretchen Anthony? Where is David Anthony? And so these cell phone records become a very critical part in locating David Anthony.
Investigators say phone records helped track David across Florida as he left a paper and video trail. Cameras recorded him stopping at jewelry stores to sell Gretchen's jewelry. One store owner shared a memorable conversation.
That he came in wanting to sell some jewelry that had been left to him by a family member that had died from COVID-19.
COVID?
Yes.
COVID strikes again.
COVID strikes again.
And in all these videos that we were able to obtain from these different businesses, nowhere was Gretchen seen.
While David Anthony was leaving a tantalizing trail of electronic breadcrumbs, he had one huge advantage. Remember, they had learned from his mother that he was on his way to Costa Rica and could be long gone.
We are now operating days behind David Anthony, understanding that his intentions at this point are to leave the country.
So it's now, from his perspective, catch me if you can.
Yes. Now we're on the hunt for David Anthony.
To her friend Kelly Hanna, Gretchen Anthony was someone who connected instantly with everyone she met.
Oh, she was so radiant and just had this gentle gracefulness about her, had the most beautiful laugh.
Someone who should somehow be protected from harm.
In a perfect world, you would hope and pray those people have angels around them to keep them safe.
But now, Gretchen had been missing for 6 days.
What is going on, and why is my beautiful friend missing?
Assistant Prosecutor Krishay Mixon knew the key to finding Gretchen was finding her estranged husband, David Anthony. She had been told David was on the run to Costa Rica and had a head start.
We're trying to make up time. We're trying to move quickly and play catch up.
Investigators tracked Gretchen's and David's cell phone signals, which appeared to place both phones traveling together, heading westward across Texas.
Now, does that suggest the two of them may be on a trip together, that she could possibly still be alive?
It suggests that their phones are pinging together to me.
Detective Jared Kennerson didn't know what happened to Gretchen, but feared the worst. As he waited for evidence taken from Gretchen's home to come back from the lab, he issued a BOLO, an alert to be on the lookout for David's black Nissan truck.
His vehicle was listed as a felony vehicle.
Investigators dug into David's past, and what they learned was stunning.
So David Anthony originally was known as David Anthony Deutsch, and then later changed his name to David Anthony.
Nobody knew that. He's local here to the Palm Beach area. He went to the same high school my children went to. It's weird that nobody realized that there was a difference.
Nobody realized, for instance, that as David Anthony Deutsch, a star college basketball player, he held up a Blockbuster video store armed with a squirt gun and assaulted a police officer. He reached a plea deal in each case and spent a short stint in jail.
David Anthony has had a history of criminal conduct. It's not that uncommon for someone with a criminal past to try to escape that past.
Tabitha Hopkins, David's former boss at the gym in Jupiter, had noticed something odd about David.
He's very talented, and his skill level was amazing, but his moods could be high or low.
Do you feel as though he does have this Jekyll and Hyde personality?
100%.
Tabitha says he became so difficult to manage, she was forced to fire him in 2017. She gave him a second chance a few years later, but by early 2020, he was increasingly unstable.
I basically said, "What's going on? What's wrong with you? You are not the same person that I knew."
Tabitha says she was forced to fire him again, and this time she caught a glimpse of David's frightening rage.
That look I'd never seen before. He was angry.
Shaken, Tabitha texted Gretchen, at the time separated from David, with a warning: stay away from him.
She had said that he is crazy, and that's the last time I talked to Gretchen.
That was February of 2020. Then, a few weeks later, just 7 days before Gretchen disappeared, this happened.
Can I get up?
No, get down!
I'm standing up.
Get down!
Police received a report that David was allegedly following teenage girls at a nearby shopping center. Once again, police body cameras were rolling when they approached him.
Get out! Now! Get out!
With Kobe sitting quietly in the truck,
He's got a dog in the car.
David lashed out and was charged with resisting arrest.
Resisting me! Sir! Flat on your face! Out like an airplane!
David spent just a few days in jail.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law.
Investigators learned he posted bail and was released just 3 days before Gretchen disappeared.
We're going to stand up, all right?
Now, as they tracked him cross-country, they knew they had a volatile man on the loose, and he was being cagey.
He would turn on cell phones, and we would be able to get a location, and then he would turn cell phones off.
David's phone pinged here in Pecos, Texas, more than 1,600 miles away from Jupiter. The next day, David's phone pinged here in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Kennerson immediately reached out to Las Cruces police for help. Still tracking his phone and armed with the description of the truck, Las Cruces police located David and pulled him over.
Put your hands up!
When officers asked David about Gretchen, he told them she had COVID.
Last I heard, she was in a CDC facility getting treatment for coronavirus.
Las Cruces police seized David's truck and his possessions, including his phone and Gretchen's phone. But they didn't have enough evidence to bring David in for questioning. So, along with Kobe, he was allowed to just walk away.
Where does he go?
I don't know where he went, but I knew that he was in Las Cruces on foot.
And you're here in Florida. What do you do?
We were awaiting the results of Gretchen Anthony's video cameras.
Jupiter police finally received the electronic recordings from Gretchen's home. They released portions of that evidence, like this video from security cameras revealing a tall figure hidden in the shadows on the patio, waiting to ambush her.
The figure moves throughout the patio areas.
Other footage was too disturbing to release to 48 hours, including the moment Gretchen appears on the patio and the figure forces her into the garage. Investigators also retrieved recordings from Gretchen's Alexa device, where she can be heard calling out for help.
She was screaming for Alexa to call 911.
She's calling out to that electronic box, call 911. In other words, call the police.
Gretchen didn't know it, but unless you specifically program your Alexa device to do so, it does not call the police in an emergency.
Do you think if the Alexa unit had called 911, that Gretchen Anthony might be alive today?
It's possible.
Video retrieved from cameras in the garage show the last images of Gretchen alive.
There comes a point where this person that we see grab Gretchen, muffle her screams, and take her into the garage. This person looks up at the camera, realizes that it's a camera, and proceeds to take that camera and snatch it down off the wall and throws it on the floor.
And what do you see?
We see David Anthony looking up into the camera. We knew that David Anthony killed Gretchen Anthony. He was the killer.
Investigators finally had the proof they needed to make an arrest. Detective Kennerson raced to Las Cruces to look for David Anthony.
We searched homeless areas. We searched hotels.
Were you nervous he's going to get away?
I was very nervous. I didn't know where he could have gone.
That evening, officers got a lucky break when they spotted David walking his dog, Kobe. David was detained and Kobe was taken to a shelter.
Hey, David. Who are you? My name is Jared Kennerson. I'm a detective with the Jupiter Police Department.
With all 6 feet 7 inches of David Anthony crammed into the back seat of a small police car, Detective Kennerson knelt down and looked directly in the eyes at the man he was certain had killed Gretchen.
There's a warrant for your arrest, and I'm going to explain that when we get back to the... Excuse me?
What?
Homicide.
For who?
Who do you think?
That's why I asked the question.
We'll talk about it at the headquarters, okay? Okay. All right?
Kennerson had his man, but still had one looming question.
We still don't have a body. Where is Gretchen Anthony?
Right handcuff.
Right handcuff.
Just getting a cut-off situation.
After a manhunt crossing 6 states, spanning nearly 2,000 miles, David Anthony was finally in custody for the murder of his estranged wife, Gretchen.
Hi, David. My name is Kelly.
Jupiter detectives Kelly Sanders and Jared Kennerson would interrogate him here at the state police headquarters in Las Cruces, New Mexico. They had one goal: get David to reveal the location of Gretchen's body.
We were in search of the truth. We were in search of where is Gretchen Anthony. I wanted to be able to tell her family, tell her daughter, I know where she is, and that was very important to us.
Right away, David made it clear it wouldn't be easy.
We have obtained a warrant for your arrest for murder. Okay? she's alive.
Kennerson was stunned when David claimed Gretchen wasn't dead.
I was in disbelief. I knew that she wasn't with us anymore.
But he's defiant with you.
That's correct.
Defiant and dishonest. Police say the story David told was pure fiction.
She was traveling with me up until El Paso. We were driving separate vehicles, so she bolted.
He said Gretchen was on the run because she discovered illegal activities at the company where she worked, and someone was after her.
Are you buying any of this?
I'm not buying it now.
When asked about the text messages sent from Gretchen's phone claiming she had COVID, David was evasive.
There was no record of her being at any hospital for COVID-19.
Okay.
Zero record.
Doesn't mean anything.
When the detectives pushed harder, insisting David sent the messages, he pushed right back.
You have her phone, you sent the text messages, you planted her car at Jupiter Medical Center because you're on video doing it.
We have all that information.
She had me do it.
Kennerson and Sanders even confronted David with the evidence captured on Gretchen's own video system.
You put your hand over her mouth and dragged her into the garage.
It's on video, David.
Still alive.
David's story never changed. He repeatedly told the detectives Gretchen was alive.
Gretchen's still alive.
In fact, during the course of the interrogation, David Anthony made that claim.
She's still alive. Gretchen's alive, I told you that. She's still alive. She's still alive.
35 times.
In fact, he says that over and over and over that she's alive. Why is he saying that?
He's trying to deflect. David is trying to deflect away from himself.
With each denial, the detectives' anger rose.
It's very frustrating because we know she's not alive. We have evidence of her not being alive.
So Kennerson switched tactics and tried to appeal to David's bond with Gretchen's young daughter.
You see that little girl right there? I want you to look at her.
I love her
Look
dearly.
at her. I know you do.
You know,
look at her real good.
And for a brief moment, it seemed like it might work.
I was the one who taught her how to ride a bicycle and shoot a hoop and use her awareness.
Awesome. Yep, and that's awesome.
Then do what's right for her.
I would never hurt her.
No.
I would never hurt either one of them.
Well, you're hurting her indirectly by not letting us know where her mom is.
You have to ask her.
We can't ask her, she's dead.
She's dead.
Their mother is still alive.
No,
That's what
she
she's
is
telling
not
you.
alive.
And then David tried a new tactic. He dared them to prove their case.
Wait.
You don't have video of me killing her.
How do you know what we have?
Show it to me.
Show
me the video.
Her dead body.
Show me the video.
Her dead body is right
Show
there.
me the video.
I know that it exists.
Okay, then
so
show it to me.
All you want.
The detectives decided it was time to take a break. They left and sent officers to adjust David's handcuffs.
David, you want water?
Kennerson came back alone, this time quiet and friendly. He made one last emotional plea by playing an audio recording of Gretchen's daughter begging David to tell them where they could find her mother. Even that didn't work.
I raised the girl since she was 2 years old. I know her voice.
David claimed falsely that it wasn't Gretchen's daughter's voice. Infuriated, Kennerson decided to let him have it.
You are a monster.
Had nothing to do with it.
You are a monster.
You're not even doing your homework, man.
Monster for
do
what
your
you
homework,
did.
Jared.
You are a monster
Do your
for what
homework.
you did. And everybody is going to look at you like that.
After more than 2 hours, David abruptly ended the interview.
I'll ask for a lawyer.
No problem. I'm not asking any more questions.
I'm still wondering where Gretchen is. I wasn't able to leave that interview knowing where she was, and that didn't necessarily sit well with me.
David Anthony was charged with second-degree murder and extradited to Florida. Days later, his dog Kobe was adopted by new owners. In Jupiter, David's arrest made the news.
According to a just-released arrest report, a neighbor heard a woman's blood-curdling scream at about 6 in the morning, March 21st.
When Kelly Hanna saw the story, she says it broke her heart.
I just sat down on my bedroom floor and just cried my eyes out. Cried my eyes out for her daughter, for her sisters, for her parents, for everyone that loved her.
David's former boss, Tabitha Hopkins, felt she'd lost 2 friends.
It was just shocking. I wanted to believe it wasn't true, but it was, obviously.
Prosecutor Dave Ehrenberg had evidence and a suspect in custody, but he knew getting a conviction wouldn't be easy.
The most troubling thing for the family and for all of us, quite frankly, was that we did not have Gretchen's body. And when you don't have a body, those are challenging cases to prosecute.
And David Anthony knew it. While David Anthony was held in custody in Palm Beach County, Florida, a grand jury indicted him on the charge of kidnapping and raised the murder charge from 2nd degree to 1st.
Could he have faced the death penalty with these charges?
Potentially, yes, for first-degree murder.
1 traffic 1.
But the search for Gretchen Anthony's remains continued.
That was the thing he had in his favor if this ever went to trial.
It was almost as though it was his ticket. It was the worst part of it for me. The fact that he was able to use evidence of his crime as leverage.
That fact also weighed heavily on Gretchen's family.
The thought of Gretchen being out there alone forever was very unsettling for them. I think the family wanted life in prison, but they wanted Gretchen.
December 2020. With the winter holidays looming, it was becoming tragically apparent that authorities may never find Gretchen without her alleged killer's help.
And so we entered into negotiations with David Anthony's defense lawyer, and were able to work out a settlement of 38 years in prison.
That settlement required David Anthony to plead guilty to 2nd-degree murder and reveal the location of Gretchen's remains.
David Anthony appeared in court today pleading guilty.
David Anthony pleads guilty.
9 months to the day after Gretchen Anthony went missing, David Anthony finally admits what everyone already knew. He murdered his wife.
We were able to find Gretchen that day. It was a relief because I know that is what her family wanted. And to be able to give that to them, it meant a lot.
David Anthony chose this nondescript patch of grass just a few miles from Gretchen's house, behind a Walmart and next to a retirement home, to hide his wife's remains. Detective Jared Kennerson took us there.
How does someone bury a body here and not get caught?
I don't know. I don't know.
This discovery, that must have been quite a moment for you.
It was very emotional for me. It was very emotional for all of us that were involved.
After months of uncertainty, Gretchen's family could finally lay her to rest.
And I could see, as hard of a time as this has been or had been for the family, I could see that there was some sort of peace.
An autopsy was performed, which explained why that neighbor heard screams the morning Gretchen disappeared.
What was the cause of death?
Cause of death was stab wounds to the neck and to the torso.
There were some defensive wounds. She fought for her life.
You used what you did to negotiate something for yourself. You are pure evil.
Gretchen's sister, Sarah Carey, and the rest of their family came face to face with David Anthony at his sentencing hearing.
You stole a mother away from her child, a daughter away from her mother. You are a monster. You are a coward. You can never be forgiven.
Then it came time for the man who created all this pain to speak, and he gave a bizarre explanation for his actions.
My religion saw the COVID pandemic as an end-of-the-world prophecy, an Armageddon that I felt compelled to escape no matter the cost. Instead of being a man, I chose to be a coward. I tried to steal what wasn't mine, and in the process I ended the life. Her life had value, her life had meaning, and I stole that life.
I'll call BS on that. Hard. Hogwash. That's appalling. Absolutely appalling.
And he left so many questions unanswered.
We will never know. We will never know. We will never know why he ended Gretchen's life.
I think that's the hardest question to ask, is why. And sometimes you just need to believe that there are higher powers in place that have a bigger plan.
And now, Gretchen's friends and family are left trying to make sense of it all.
How is Gretchen's daughter doing?
You know, children are resilient. She is blessed to have her father in her life, and she appears to be doing well.
If one person was touched by how much she loved people, by how much she loved her child, by how much she just loved living life to the fullest, then her life mattered.
"48 hours to miss it would be a crime."
Were you at all prepared for what happened in this case?
Hello? There's a house that's on fire on the other side of the fence. There's fire coming out of the window. I think I heard screaming and crying. I don't know.
Did it sound like it was coming from the residence?
Yeah, I think so.
The lead detective called me. He said there was an accident in your parents' house. And he said there was a fire. Your parents didn't make it. I just started hysterically crying. So I flew up on the first flight out the next day, and that's when they told us what had really happened. The fire wasn't an accident. My parents had been shot, and the fire was a cover.
How, why, and who?
Neighbors on this usually quiet street are stunned.
It's not real. I wanted to know why this happened to Scott and Janet. I wanted to know who did this. They were great people. They were giving people, and that's not the way it's supposed to go.
Did your parents have any kind of conflict with people that might want to hurt them?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
It didn't make sense that this could or would happen.
How soon did investigators focus on Brandon Pettit as the killer?
Instantly. They focused on Brandon as soon as one of the neighbors said, "Oh, they have a son that's weird."
Is there any physical evidence that ties your brother to the murder?
No.
There is no DNA, there are no fingerprints, there is no blood. But what you do have here is a litany of statements and actions that point to Brandon.
The most damaging evidence against Brandon came out of his own mouth.
He's terrible in his ability to figure out what's appropriate.
He referred to his parents as and that he wanted his dad dead. I mean, and this is like just a few weeks before the murder.
You have more than once, before your parents died, said, wish my parents were dead. A lot of people said that about their parents.
It's clear that your brother isn't like everyone else, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. He told them he had Asperger's.
When somebody's autistic, they're different than you. He doesn't act the same way as you or I might act.
If here's your dad laying on a body bag, you know what? You're already past it. I'm not past it. You have no emotional response. Do you want me to break down and cry? Because I don't normally cry.
Autism is the reason I focused on him. It's the reason that they became convinced that he was guilty.
I don't know who killed my parents. Yes, you do. No, I don't. Yes, no. Yes. No.
Your brother was working that night, right? He has an alibi.
Yeah.
You murdered your parents. I didn't do anything.
He intended it, he desired it, and he did it.
I think there's a lot more to this story.
I loved my parents.
Words don't make you a murderer.
The morning of August 8, 2013, had started out full of promise for then 28-year-old Lauren Pettit living in Los Angeles.
I remember I had texted one of my best friends that morning, today's gonna be a good day.
What she didn't know was that 300 miles away in Modesto, California, firefighters had been called to her parents' home at 3 in the morning. Their bedroom had gone up in flames.
Fire crews still trying to determine where that fire started. We were told that 3 investigators are on scene.
Lauren's parents, Scott and Janet Pettit, were found dead inside. How would you describe your mom and dad? You really miss them, don't you?
They were amazing.
Two of the family's dogs also didn't make it, but one, Bailey, survived. Is it kind of a miracle she's even here?
It's insane. Mm-hmm.
Bailey means a lot to you now.
Everything. She's like my lifeline.
Mike Anderson, a close friend of the family, had arrived at the scene after getting a call that something terrible had happened.
When I turned on to Scott and Janet Street, there was fire trucks, ambulances, and so my heart sank. I'm gonna say it's like losing an arm or something. You lose a part of your soul, a part of your body. And that's what it felt like. This can't be happening. But it was.
And things only got worse. Investigators soon determined the fire was no accident. Scott and Janet had been shot a total of 7 times, and evidence of an accelerant was found throughout their upstairs room.
More than 12 hours after firefighters made the gruesome discovery, police investigators remain sifting through clues in what they are now calling a pair of suspicious deaths.
The community lost 2 people that did more for their communities than hundreds of people will ever do.
Scott was an avid car collector and owner of a martial arts studio in nearby Riverbank. The local paper once called him Citizen of the Year. Janet, a neonatal nurse, had recently earned her PhD. When you think about your mom, what comes to mind?
She was just incredible, very caring and selfless. My dad was very sarcastic, very witty, loved to give back, loved to help everyone.
The couple had been in their late 20s when they first met. Scott was working as a paramedic then.
I believe the story is he was bringing a baby in from the ambulance, and she was one of the receiving nurses.
The two would later marry and start a family. Lauren was 2 years old when her brother Brandon was born, and the family was complete.
Your mom writes, Lauren was so excited to have her baby brother home. You do look very happy to have a little brother. Mm-hmm. First kiss from a big sister.
Mm-hmm. I think I thought I had a new toy.
Growing up, Lauren says Brandon loved playing pranks on people, but when it came to career aspirations, that was something he was serious about.
What did he want to do?
He really enjoyed firefighting, I guess just helping people in some way, shape, or form, police force, things like that.
She says Brandon was smart, but struggled socially.
Do you remember how old you were when you noticed any difference with Brandon? When you started realizing that he wasn't quite like everybody else's little brother?
Early childhood, definitely. I was under the age of 10 for sure. Maybe 7-ish.
What do you think you first noticed?
Him being really stubborn and disobedient in a sense.
And she says he had trouble making friends.
You know, he was almost looked down upon or looked at as if he just didn't fit in, and that was hard.
Was he lonely?
I'm sure.
So lonely, says Lauren, that he would tell stories and make things up just to get attention.
I don't think he ever thought that he was telling a story or lying. It was just, I can do this or I can do that or, I can get this. And it's like, okay, let's come back down to earth and let's figure out whether or not it's reality.
Scott and Janet had long been aware of Brandon's struggles. They took him to see numerous specialists. And when Brandon was in high school, he was diagnosed with Asperger's, a developmental disorder affecting his ability to communicate and at times read social cues. Now, Asperger's falls under autism spectrum disorder.
With Asperger's, I think it's really difficult for him to be aware of how he's presenting himself and what he's saying and how he's saying things and how he's reacting to certain things or not reacting and whether or not he's doing what people would consider the norm.
So when Lauren called Brandon, then 25, shortly after they both learned of their parents' deaths, his unusual reaction, she says, was usual for him.
How is he dealing with it?
In his normal manner, which is, very emotionless. When he's sad, kind of just keeps it all in.
But it was a red flag to police, who soon zeroed in on Brandon. The day after the murders, before Lauren even got to see him, Brandon ended up in a police interrogation room for 9.5 hours.
And he went along with it?
Mm-hmm.
And why do you think he was so willing to talk to the police?
Probably the same reason I was, just wanting answers.
Brandon was again called in for questioning just over a week after the murders. Lauren drove him to the station.
Did the investigators give you any idea that your brother was a suspect?
Mm-mm.
He was by then, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
If you had known what was going on, if you had any idea your brother was a suspect, would you have taken him over there so willingly?
I wouldn't have taken him there, period. We would have had an attorney.
After nearly 4 hours, police arrested Brandon for the murder of his parents.
I think I lost my voice and my breath for a little bit. I was like, what? Why?
Just over a week after suddenly losing her parents, Lauren now had to deal with the news that her brother had been arrested and charged with the murders.
I think I just started to hyperventilate and was like, I don't even know what's going on.
In addition to Brandon, a man named Felix Valverde had also been arrested and charged. Lauren had never heard of Felix Valverde, but Brandon and Felix were both members of a group called the Clampers, a more than century-old fraternal organization dedicated to the historical preservation of the American West. But clampers are also known for enjoying getting together to drink.
I think the only reason he was a part of that was because he thought he would have friends.
Did your parents ever express concern about any of these people that your brother might be hanging out with?
Mm-mm. I'd never heard about them.
Brandon was staying at his parents' house, but on the night of the fire, he was out working the graveyard shift as a security guard.
And there are people who can say he was there.
Yep, he has an alibi. His boss or his superior confirmed he was there.
But his alibi didn't seem to matter to investigators. They believed that Brandon paid Felix to commit the murders. The alleged motive? To inherit his parents' money. But Lauren couldn't make sense of it. She says Brandon loved their parents and actually benefited more with their parents alive.
They paid his bills. My brother didn't even know the value of $1.
If anything happened to your parents, was your brother going to inherit anything?
Not that he knew of, not that I knew of either.
Police first began looking at Felix after Brandon, in his first interview with police, mentioned other friends, but curiously failed to mention Felix. That led to a search of Felix's apartment, where their suspicions paid off. They found keys to the Pettit home, Scott and Janet's wallets, a box of ammunition, and 7 spent shell casings concealed in a planter outside. Significant because Brandon's parents were shot a total of 7 times. Hours later, police called Brandon in for that second taped interview and confronted him.
How did he come up with the keys to kill your parents? I don't know. You know why? You gave them to him. I didn't give him.
But the detective told Brandon that Felix was telling a different story.
Felix says you gave him the keys. And the keys both fit the garage door and the front door, Brandon. And if you think for a minute that anybody is going to believe your story, including your sister, you're mistaken. And you know what the thing about Felix is in your life that makes him more believable? He's remorseful. I mean, remorseful. How does that mean? Sorry he did.
The detective also told Brandon that he had phone records showing that Brandon and Felix spoke the night of the murders.
What was that about? On my break, I was asking him what we were doing for the weekend.
Despite the pressure, Brandon repeatedly denied having anything to do with the deaths of his parents.
I don't know who killed my parents. Yes, you do. No, I don't. Yes, you do. No. Yes. No.
But in that second interview, Brandon made incriminating admissions. Brandon said that he gave Felix bullets sometime in the weeks leading up to the murders.
He had asked me for the box of bullets that I had because my .22 hasn't been fired in 2 years because I don't have a bolt for it.
And he admitted giving Felix $100 just days after the murders. But the most jaw-dropping part of Brandon's story was when he told detectives that about a month before the fire, Felix had threatened to kill Brandon's parents unless Brandon paid him $10,000.
And you haven't told us something that is this important and you're telling us now? I'm remembering a lot. You know what? And where'd you go? Did you go to the police station? No, I went back to my parents' house. Why did you go to the police station? I don't know. Instead, you give him a box of bullets? And I can see that was a bad idea. That was a bad idea. That's a bad excuse. That's an even worse lie.
Even if it was the truth, why would Brandon wait 9 days after the murders to tell them all of this?
Why? I didn't want to talk to anybody. You don't want to solve that crime? I wanted to do it myself. Oh, wow, that was a new one. What did you do? Where are you? I wanted to find out who did it myself.
And more damaging, why did Brandon remain friendly with Felix, not only after the threat was made, but even after Brandon's parents wound up dead?
So he tells you he's going to kill his parents, you give him ammunition, and then you give him $100. He said he had paid his bills and needed some money. I had $100, so I figured I'd help him out until he got paid.
To the guy that just was threatening to kill with your parents if you didn't pay him money, you're helping them out. Matter of fact, you're hanging out with them afterwards, all buddy-buddy.
I didn't believe he would actually do it.
Investigators were convinced that Brandon was the mastermind behind his parents' deaths. But Martha Carlton Magana, an attorney appointed to represent Brandon after his arrest, says the interview proves nothing.
He didn't have anything to do with it. He doesn't know what happened.
She says detectives weren't interested in the truth, and they lied to Brandon when they told him that Felix had already confessed.
They've already decided he's the suspect, and they're really trying to feed him a lot of information so that he'll regurgitate it back.
She says the detectives knew Brandon had Asperger's.
And this whole Asperger's thing, I'm not buying any.
And suggests they mishandled the interview.
Do you believe they were taking advantage of his condition?
I think they were doing what they always do, and because of Brandon's condition, he was more vulnerable to that kind of interrogation. Everything in that second interview needs to be taken with a grain of salt.
Lauren agrees and firmly believes her brother's innocent.
He really is a good person.
Does this seem at all in your brother's character to have your parents killed?
Not at all.
But Brandon's statements in that interview wouldn't be the only hurdle that his defense would have to overcome. A young woman by the name of Sarah Wilson had surfaced. In the weeks leading up to the murders, she says Brandon had been promising her the world, things that only money could buy.
What do you make of Brandon's statements to police?
Sarah Wilson and Brandon Pettit met when they were in high school. But Sarah says they reconnected online in the summer of 2013, shortly before the murders.
We got to talking, seeing how we were doing throughout the years.
Brandon had just gone through a messy breakup with a woman named Susan Sanchez. Susan was pregnant with Brandon's child.
How did your brother feel about becoming a dad?
Very excited. My family was everything to him, so.
But with his relationship with Susan over, Brandon was apparently ready to shift his attention to someone new.
I had some inclinations that he had a little crush on me, but I didn't pursue anything with them. I didn't give him any hints that I was attracted to him in that way.
That didn't seem to deter Brandon, who ended up making her an offer she says she couldn't refuse.
He had mentioned that his parents were going to buy him $1 million home in Georgia, and he said that I can move in with him. I, of course, said yes. Who wouldn't want to live in $1 million home? I was going through a lot of stuff in my personal life. I just really wanted to get out of California.
As enticing as it all was, Sarah suspected it might be too good to be true.
I took it with a grain of salt. I didn't think it was really going to happen.
But Sarah says Brandon would send her real estate listings daily.
Oh, the houses had a shower the size of my bedroom now. They were just gorgeous.
And he showed her the email conversation he was having with a realtor.
Which kind of made me think, okay, this is really gonna happen.
And the promises didn't stop there.
He one day mentioned that, oh, my mom, seeing how happy I am, how excited I am to be moving with you, that after we move, she will open a boutique for you to run yourself. I did find it kind of strange that his parents would spend this amount of money on a business for me when I had never met them.
Sarah says she thought she'd finally meet them since Brandon told her his parents had bought plane tickets to take them all to Atlanta to look at homes. But a couple of days before that supposed trip, Sarah received a strange text from Brandon.
I got a text out of nowhere from Brandon saying, "You're getting a boob job for Christmas, LOL."
The text came in at 10:43 p.m. on August 7th, Just a few hours later, Brandon's parents were discovered dead. He delivered the news to Sarah the next morning.
I got a text from Brandon saying my parents died last night in a house fire. I didn't press him for any information. I just figured that's a touchy subject. His parents had just died.
On August 9th, after Brandon's first interview with detectives, Sarah says he called her and they met up.
He told me that his aunt had canceled the flight tickets and they just want to keep that under wraps, so don't tell the detectives that. I thought that was very odd. That's when I started to think, something's kind of weird.
Sarah would later learn there were no airline tickets, no trip to Georgia planned, and Brandon's parents didn't die in a house fire. They were murdered. It wasn't long before detectives showed up at her door.
They just started asking me questions about Brandon.
She told them everything about those $1 million homes, the supposed trip to Georgia, and the text Brandon sent promising her a breast enhancement just hours before his parents were killed. For police, it amounted to a financial motive for murder. But Lauren Pettit believes it actually amounts to nothing.
Do you believe your brother really told her those things?
Possibly, but that was just who my brother was.
Brandon's defense attorney agrees and says Brandon's conversations with Sarah shouldn't be given much weight at all.
That was a fantasy. He was playing out with a girlfriend to impress her, which he'd always done.
Brandon actually called a realtor and actually pinpointed some houses. Is it possible that Brandon decided he was going to make that fantasy come true and killed his parents so he'd have the money to actually buy that house?
I don't see that as being realistic. I see that as being something that Brandon did in order to impress friends.
What about the fact, though, right before his parents died, he had texted Sarah Wilson and said, for Christmas, you're going to get breast enhancement surgery. Just a coincidence, Martha?
Yeah.
Honestly?
Yeah. I'm not sure it was the first time he said it either.
Somebody could say, Brandon lies a lot. He lies to girlfriends, he lies to the police if you're right. How do you know when to believe Brandon then?
You don't. Brandon lies a lot and very badly. There's no question about that. So you look to the evidence.
And hard, definitive evidence directly tying Brandon to the murder of his parents, says Martha, just isn't there. Lauren Pettit stood by her brother Brandon.
He's so much bigger than I am.
As he awaited trial, convinced of his innocence. But as the case dragged on, she was all too aware there was a possibility she might end up losing him too.
It's a huge burden on your shoulders, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It's not really about me anymore. My brother depends on me.
What do you think your parents would want you to do?
Fight for my brother, absolutely, because that's what they would do. I'd take care of myself.
On the 4-year anniversary of her parents' deaths, we were with Lauren as she made the trip to the cemetery. On that same day, she visited Brandon in jail as well.
Instead of it being face-to-face, it's video visitation, and I see him on a screen for 30 minutes.
One court delay after another. It was 7 long years from the time of the murders of Scott and Janet Pettit to when Brandon Pettit's trial finally began on September 1st, 2020. Cameras were not allowed in court. Defense attorney Robert Winston was now representing Brandon, and he was up for the challenge.
I've had a lot of cases over the years, so the basic case wasn't that unusual. The fact that Brandon had Asperger's, that put a new dimension on the case.
Brandon was initially supposed to be tried alongside Felix Valverde, but about a month before the trial, the judge made a rare finding that Valverde was incompetent to stand trial. That means the man who may have actually done the killing is unavailable to the defense.
How can Brandon be put on trial when the person who police believe actually did the killing is considered incompetent?
That's our law.
I mean, is that fair to Brandon?
Sadly, fairness rarely enters into it.
Valverde was placed in psychiatric treatment with the hope that he might be able to go on trial at a later date. Due to Valverde's still pending case, the prosecutor's office declined our request for an interview. We asked Mary Fulginiti, a CBS News consultant and former federal prosecutor, to analyze the state's case.
You have to look at the totality of the evidence, and as you look at the totality of his statements and his actions, I think it's very difficult to say he did not plan it, he did not plot it, he did not desire it, he did not intend it, he did not want it.
But the physical evidence only connects Felix Valverde. The prosecution began by calling investigators who detailed all that evidence found at Felix's apartment. Scott and Janet's wallets, the box of ammunition, those 7 spent shell casings, and most important, they would argue, keys to the Pettit home.
How would Felix get a hold of the keys to the house? The keys were given to him by Brandon, and that was so that he could access the house. So he'd get into the house and kill his parents easily.
The prosecution also called witnesses who knew Felix and testified that he had obtained a new gun like this one in the weeks leading up to the murders. That gun, however, says defense attorney Robert Winston, was never found.
It was a Western-style .22 revolver. We certainly don't know that that was the murder weapon. It wasn't recovered. Don't know where it is. We don't even know if that type of weapon was consistent with the bullet fragments that were found in the bodies. There was no hard evidence of anything.
They don't know if a .22 was used to kill the
Well,
Pettits.
what they do know, though, and this is critical in a circumstantial evidence case, they do know they were shot 7 times. They found 7 .22 caliber shell casings in a planter outside of Felix Valverde's house.
In an effort to directly tie Brandon to the murders, the prosecution called Mike Anderson, the Pettits' close family friend. He testified about a conversation he says he had with Brandon a few months before the murders.
He just told me if my parents weren't here, my life would be better.
Mike says he didn't think much of it at the time, but with Scott and Janet now gone and Brandon on trial for their murders, that comment carried a whole new weight.
I felt like I didn't help him, but I had to tell the truth. It was hard, it was sad.
And that wasn't all Mike testified to. He also told the jury that in the days following the murders, Brandon was looking to sell his dad's prized cars, including a 1961 Corvette.
He wanted to sell the vet and move to Georgia. It made me feel very uneasy. It made me question everything.
The prosecution also called Susan Sanchez, Brandon's ex-girlfriend, the mother of his then 6-year-old daughter, who still had a strained relationship with him. She said Brandon once mentioned that Corvette to her, too.
He couldn't wait for his dad to be dead so that it would be all his. And he's also told Susan Sanchez on at least 5 or 6 occasions she testified to that he wanted his parents dead.
And there was more. Susan testified she had an ex-husband whom she had mentioned to Brandon.
And he said, look, if you want to make him disappear, I've got a friend, Felix Valverde, who you can pay $500 to, and your ex will disappear. Coincidences? Too many.
Brandon's high school friend, Sarah Wilson, also took the stand and testified about all those promises Brandon had made her. And the lead detective detailed what Brandon had said in that second interview.
So he tells you that he's going to kill his parents, you give him ammunition, and then you give him $100. He said he had paid his bills and needed some money.
It's a circumstantial case. The strongest evidence against Brandon, his own words and actions before and after the murders.
Has there ever been a moment, though, through any of this that you've been wondering, maybe my brother did it?
No, but I'm not gonna lie, I'm not naive. I still believe that my brother is innocent, but if someone can prove to me that he's not with actual evidence, not just words, then it is what it is, and I'll deal with that.
Brandon did plan and plot the murder of his parents. He wanted the Corvette. He wanted the house. He did it for money.
But would Brandon kill the parents he loved and leaned on? The defense has to raise doubts with their star witness, who knows Brandon best.
You're testifying for someone you love so much, and in your head, all you think about is, what if I say the wrong thing?
See more of the evidence against Brandon Pettit at 48hours.com.
Seven years after both of her parents were murdered, Lauren Pettit took the stand to try to save the man accused of killing them, her own brother, now 32 years old.
There's so many things going through your head, and there's no coaching, there's no nothing. You're just, here you go. Good luck.
Defense attorney Robert Winston wanted the jury to see a very different side of Brandon and his family.
This was not a family where there was hatred, there was animosity, that there was a motive to kill. It just didn't exist.
Lauren described how important family was to her brother.
It was his whole world.
And the dogs who died in the fire, she says Brandon loved them too.
I have photos and videos galore of him with his dogs. He would skip out on family vacations just to stay home and make sure the dogs were safe and okay.
Lauren also questioned the alleged financial motive, telling the jury that her parents were actually in debt at the time of their death. And that Corvette that Brandon supposedly wanted, she says it was already partially in his name. But perhaps the most crucial part of her testimony casts doubt on the prosecution's theory that Felix Valverde got into the Pettit home with house keys that Brandon gave him.
My parents had an extra large size dog door on their back sliding glass door, which is how I had gotten into the house the day after they passed. It's how the detective told us he had gotten into the house earlier that day, and he was a much larger man.
So the detective himself went through the doggy door, and that was never considered as the way the killer might have gotten into the house?
Correct.
But then, how did Felix get those keys to the Pettit home?
I think the keys were probably in my parents' wallets.
Lauren says her parents had digital door locks where you punch a code to enter. But in the event the battery-powered locks died, she says, her parents kept spare keys tucked inside their wallets and left those wallets out in the open on the kitchen counter.
Picture it this way. Felix Valverde goes to the house. He crawls in. Now he's inside. He sees a purse. He sees a wallet. He either thinks, I'll get these on the way out, or he picks them up right then. And he goes upstairs and he does what he does. But when he picked up the wallet of Scott Pettit, it had a key in it. When he picked up the wallet of Janet Pettit, it had a key in it.
If Brandon didn't hire Felix, if he didn't ask him to kill his parents, why would Felix do it on his own?
Two motives. One, Felix thought there was money in the house. The other theory is that he heard Brandon say these things about his parents. And he thought that Brandon would be happy with him.
But there was one big problem with the defense's theory. In a section of Brandon's videotaped interview not shown in court, he admitted giving Felix the keys.
I know how he got the keys.
How do you know? Okay. How did he get the keys?
I got the keys. I never intended him to actually do anything. He was supposed to scare them, okay? Not hurt them, okay?
How was he?
It was an admission that could destroy his defense. Brandon actually admitted that he sent Felix to his home to convince his parents to stop contacting his ex-girlfriend, Susan. But because Brandon said it after he had asked for a lawyer, the judge didn't allow it in as evidence. And as bad as it sounds, defense attorney Robert Winston claims that Brandon made it up in an effort to end the interrogation.
It seemed as though Brandon was saying, I'll tell you anything you want to hear, just let me out of here.
Winston was determined to show the jury why they shouldn't believe much of what Brandon said. He called Dr. Laura Geiger, a clinical psychologist appointed by the court, who testified that Brandon's Asperger's could explain his questionable statements and behavior. Dr. Geiger, does she believe that Brandon's Asperger's autism interfered in that police interview to his detriment?
Absolutely. People with autism take information in differently than we do. So when the police ask a question, there's always the worry, is it really understood?
Winston was feeling optimistic when, after 9 days of testimony from 23 witnesses, the case went to the jury. Deliberations stretched on for about a day and a half, and then a verdict. Guilty. Our camera caught a glimpse of Brandon as he was led out of the courtroom. How did your brother react to the verdict?
He was shocked. And then really scared.
Scared of what?
His future.
4 months later, Brandon was given the maximum sentence, 2 life terms without the possibility of parole. Lauren was devastated.
It was hard not to feel paternal towards her.
She's lost everything, hasn't she?
Really? Yes, she has.
Lauren remains convinced her brother is innocent. She hopes one day Felix Valverde will go on trial. And maybe then she'll get the answers she's looking for. Do you think Felix Valverde killed your parents?
I think he probably had something to do with it.
Felix has pleaded not guilty, and his attorneys declined our request for an interview. As Lauren begins to pick up the pieces, she sadly no longer has her dog Bailey to comfort her. He passed away in 2019. Now a new friend, Jelly, is helping to put a smile back on her face. And yet nothing and no one will ever fill that void left by the loss of her once close-knit family. What do you miss the most about your parents?
Everything. My dad's jokes. My mom just tirelessly working to make sure I'm okay. I would give anything to have them back.
A young woman disappears after a Snapchat rendezvous.
I try to keep my hopes high, but after 6 months, it's a little hard for that.
The murder that inspired a law.
Nikki's story has allowed us to take a giant leap forward.
And started a movement. 48 Hours, Saturday at 10/9 Central on CBS.
You go back to the first days after the murder. This might have been a dispute between teenagers. It might have involved a girl. It might have involved drinking. Whoever knew about John's killing kept this secret for over 40 years.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
September 26, 1969 is the day that changed the lives of Bill and Evelyn McCabe forever.
I don't think I've had a whole night's sleep since it's happened.
If it's not too painful, can you tell me about his last day?
Went to a dance, his second dance.
15-year-old John McCabe was looking forward to going to the Knights of Columbus dance that evening.
Took a shower, scrubbed his hair, put his father's aftershave on. He didn't shave, but he put his father's aftershave on. Oh yeah, he got all spruced up. 11 o'clock, I started looking out the window. That's when the dance closes. He should be home by midnight. So I went down to the dance and checked the road, screaming out the window, "John! John!" No John. I started praying at that point.
The day after John McCabe went missing, 3 young kids were cutting through a vacant lot when they made a horrifying discovery, which was the body of John McCabe. He had been bound and gagged and tied with rope. After John's body was found, Bill McCabe, a pillar of strength, had to do the unspeakable. That was identify the body of his dead son.
Never forget it. People keep talking about closure. You can't shake it.
He then had to go home and inform his family of what had happened.
Bill said, "Honey, our son's dead."
Well, I was a senior in high school.
Were you fearful?
Yes. They hadn't caught the people that killed my brother.
Did you think when you looked at kids in your classes, maybe it's him, maybe it's him?
Maybe it was them. Maybe they knew something. How could they not know anything?
Without physical evidence, without a witness, this case remained unsolved for several years, and several years became decades.
Ready?
This is it.
I pray every day justice will be served.
There was only one way this case was going to be solved.
Do you solemnly swear that...
And how old were you in 1969?
17.
And that's if someone came forward and talked.
How do you know how John McCabe died?
I was there.
It took almost every ounce of strength left in his 85-year-old body to get to the witness stand. But Bill McCabe waited 43 years for this day and the start of this trial in January 2013.
Good morning, Mr. McCabe. Do you remember September 27th, 1969?
Yes, sir.
How old was John at that day?
He was 15 years, 6 months, and 2 weeks.
I always visualized him as being a big shot somewhere. John Joseph McCabe, my son JJ, you know. But I never got to see any of those things.
In the fall of 1969, 2 men had just landed on the moon.
Beautiful, just beautiful.
Thousands had just crashed at Woodstock. And John McCabe, 15 years, 6 months, and 2 weeks old, was living with his family in Tewksbury, Massachusetts.
I think we have a right to be proud of him, yeah?
John's father, Bill, was an engineer. His mother, Evelyn, worked at the school library. His sisters, Roberta, who was 6, and Debbie, who was 17, remember a brother who was always busy, doing what brothers do.
It was pretty interesting. You open the closet door and your closet's filled with grasshoppers.
I just remember his hands were always dirty, like with oil or grease or a frog in his hand.
So you brought home a goose once, too.
Oh, yeah, Canadian goose. Big sucker.
It's fun to watch you talk about this because your eyes light up. I mean, you have very fond memories of those days.
Oh, yeah.
Evelyn holds on to any reminder of her son.
I have John's money. I can't spend it.
And you've had it all these years?
Yeah, 45 years. Every now and then the smell's gone off of it now. I almost put it in the casket with him. And then I thought, no, I'll just keep it with me. And when I see him again, I'll give it to him.
When she last saw John, Evelyn gave him permission to go to that dance at the Knights of Columbus Hall.
I let him go. I let him go out the door. I shouldn't have.
The next day, police came to the house and took Evelyn's husband to the basement to talk.
They didn't want me to know anything.
But you heard.
I heard them.
Evelyn got on her knees and pressed her ear to a vent in the bathroom.
This is where I could hear everything that was going on down cellar.
The police were telling her husband John's body was discovered in a vacant lot in the neighboring gritty city of Lowell.
Well, what did you hear?
I heard that he was tied up and there was tape on his eyes and his mouth. I heard a lot. I cried. I laid there and cried.
A huge investigation was launched by the Lowell, Tewksbury, and Massachusetts State Police.
What evidence did they collect at the scene?
The rope that was used to tie John up, tape that was used to tape his eyes and his mouth, all of his clothing, his shoes.
Jerry Leone was the local DA who years later took on the case. Today, he's a partner in the law firm Nixon Peabody.
There was forensic evidence, but it wasn't really meaningful because you couldn't tie it to anyone in particular.
But the case looked promising at first. A witness had spotted a car near the crime scene that night.
I believe the way he had described it was a 1965 Chevy Impala colored plum or maroon.
Then another tip led police to a schoolmate of John's, 16-year-old Mike Ferreira, who says he barely knew John.
I probably seen him like a handful of times in my life. I didn't really, he wasn't a friend.
Ferreira and his friend Nancy Williams were questioned because they had picked up John when he was hitchhiking on his way to the dance.
I picked him up and I gave him a ride to the corner and I never saw him again.
Ferreira told police that while the dance was underway, he left Nancy and met up with his best friend, Walter Shelley.
Me, Walter, and Bob Ryan took a ride to Lowell, try to get some beer.
They were in Walter Shelley's car. It was maroon, and it was a 1965 Chevy Impala. Police searched it but found no evidence. Still, Walter Shelley was now a person of interest. He was brought in for questioning and later polygraphed 5 times. The test showed he was lying in all vital areas of the questioning.
If you read the reports, now you start seeing Ferreira and Shelley, Shelley and Ferreira.
Ferreira was questioned multiple times.
I knew where they were going. Not totally stupid.
But Ferreira wasn't helping himself. At one point, while joyriding with some friends, he suddenly blurted out that he killed John.
I was 16, we're drinking, joking, and I said, yeah, I did it. They knew I was joking. I was a joker.
Leone says police were not amused, but there was no way to corroborate what Ferreira said.
Without physical evidence, without a witness statement putting him at the scene, the Ferreira lead kept drying up.
There were dozens of other people police investigated, other teens, local drug dealers, and pedophiles. Detectives worked this case hard for 2 years, while Bill McCabe worked on a record of his son's life.
I wasn't trying to be an author or anything like that. I was just looking at ways to hold on to him, keep his memory.
He also tried to make sure the police never forgot his son.
I was always on the phone talking to the police. I'd be up in the middle of the night. She'd be saying, "What the hell are you doing up? Get back to bed."
Despite Bill's persistence and the intense police effort, there were no arrests.
Shelley and Ferreira went into the service in 1970, so the following year, the two of them left the area.
And the McCabe family was left without any answers for decades.
This is the little compass so he can find his way home.
With each passing season, John McCabe's case grew colder. But his mother kept asking the most painful questions about how he died.
I tried to strangle myself, just to visualize what it felt like. I wondered, did he call for me? What kind of a mother was I? I wasn't there for him.
For a time, Evelyn set a place for John at the dinner table. His absence was a constant presence in the house.
You can't just do something wrong and not have to pay for it.
The case stalled for some 30 years until November 2000.
John and I went just about everywhere, you know.
When Jack Ward, a childhood friend of John's, made good on a decades-old promise to Bill McCabe.
He would say, "Jackie, if you hear anything about John, you keep your eyes out and let me know." And I says, "If I ever hear anything, Mr. McCabe, you know, I'm going to tell you."
Ward had been at a cookout at this house in Tewksbury where he ran into a kid from the old neighborhood, Mike Ferreira. This photo was taken that day.
We're all sitting around drinking, and that's when he just blurted out, "I know who killed John." And he said it to me again, "I know who killed John." And, you know, finally I said, "Who?" And he says, "Walter." I said, "Walter Shelley." He says, "Yeah."
Walter Shelley.
I said, "What would be Walter's motive to kill John?" And he said, "Marla, because of Marla."
Marla Shiner. Ward said she was Walter Shelley's girlfriend back then, but he said the trouble was Marla also seemed to like John McCabe, and by all accounts, Walter Shelley was one very jealous young man. The footage you see was taken a few years after the murder. Ward admits he sat on the information for a while, worried about how to tell Bill McCabe.
You go knocking on somebody's door and say, "Hey, I know who killed your son. You better have it right."
I was shocked when he told me. So I scribbled it on a piece of paper. I put it in the Bible on a page beginning the book of John so I wouldn't forget it. And I immediately called the police.
But it took many more calls from Bill McCabe and 3 more years for police to show up at Ferreira's door. It was now 2003. Ferrera worked as a forklift operator, lived in Salem, New Hampshire, and Nancy Williams, his friend back in the day, was now his wife.
Mike wouldn't hurt a fly. Never, I know, he wouldn't.
Ferrera says he remembers the cookout conversation with Jack Ward very differently.
Jackie went and told them, I said, Walter Shelley killed him. I never said that. And at this cookout, you know, I already had a few drinks, and he's running his mouth, Shelley did it, Shelley did it. And this went on all afternoon. And finally, I got sick of hearing it. I says, he probably did it. Next thing I know, 3 years, 4 years later, I had the cops down my house wanting to talk to me about John McCabe.
Ferrera also denies discussing the jealousy motive with Ward.
That's his theory. I never said that.
But again, there was no corroborating evidence. So, again, the case stalled.
Well, what did they tell you about the investigation?
It's going fine. It was always going fine.
And how long did they tell you that for?
And you know what? It was sitting on a frickin' shelf.
But the police had not forgotten John McCabe.
All right, thanks.
In January of 2007, 37 years after the murder, Jerry Leone was sworn in as Middlesex County District Attorney.
The Lowell Police Department took it upon themselves to visit me weeks after I'd been elected to say, we'd actually like you to focus on this one and take a hard look at it with us.
Investigators had gone back over the files, and a name jumped out at them in Mike Ferrera's latest interview with police. In recounting the night of the murder, Ferrera said he was with Walter Shelley, but this time he added a name and said the other guy with them was Alan Brown.
Edward Allen Brown's name surfaces as someone who we're going to focus on.
Edward Allen Brown was 17 and lived not far from the McCabes when John was killed. He had long since moved away, but when police tracked him down, he said he knew nothing about the murder, never even heard of it.
So how likely is it that he would never even heard of the murder of John McCabe in a town the size of Tewksbury?
I'd say curious at the time.
And police got a call from Brown's wife that was even more curious.
His wife told police that she thought he was lying.
His wife said that she thought he was lying?
Right. Carolyn Brown indicates to police that 20 to 25 years earlier, her husband had told her about an evening where he was involved in a young man being killed.
But even that wasn't enough. It was the same old story. There was no corroborating evidence and no real movement in the case until 2011, when Detective Linda Coughlin was assigned to find the killers.
You think this case really took off when you met Detective Linda Coughlin?
Yes, definitely.
Why did you feel that way?
Because of her attitude. She said, I'm going to get them. And she did.
Detective Coughlin zeroed back in on Edward Allen Brown. He was retired from the Air Force and living in New Hampshire. Coughlin interrogated Brown just twice. But when Brown learned he failed a polygraph, he suddenly broke down. He confessed that he was there when Walter Shelley and Mike Ferrera killed John McCabe.
Why?
Lowell police brought in the McCabes and told them Brown's story about John's final hours.
My dad started crying. He keeled over on the table.
On April 15th, 2011, nearly 42 years after John McCabe's body was found in that vacant lot, his father's perseverance finally paid off.
Mr. McCabe held our feet to the fire. He never let us forget John McCabe's murder.
The DA's office announced the indictments of Edward Allen Brown for manslaughter and Michael Ferreira and Walter Shelley for first-degree murder. Two names known to police since day one, two names also gathering dust here in John's Book of Mourners.
The murderers came to the wake, and they came to the funeral.
Why do you think Edward Allen Brown confessed? Chat now on Facebook and X.
It would take almost 2 years to bring the men accused of killing John McCabe to trial. 2 more years, the McCabes would have to wait.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony?
January 18th, 2013.
Would you please be seated?
Edward Allen Brown was called to testify against his one-time friend, Mike Ferreira, the first defendant to go on trial.
Do you see Michael Ferrara in the courtroom today?
Yes, over there.
Mr. Brown.
For the first time, Brown publicly shared the details of the night John died. Brown says he was at home watching television when Mike Ferreira and Walter Shelley pulled up to his house.
They wanted me to go with them to help them.
Help them do what?
I didn't know at the time until I got in the car and we left.
Brown testified they were on their way to the Knights of Columbus Hall when he learned of their plan.
They said they wanted to go find this kid that had been, messing around with Marla to teach him a lesson.
And how did you know Marla Shiner?
That was Walter's girlfriend. Michael noticed John McCabe was thumbing, and he said, "There he is." Then we pulled up next to John. Michael got out and grabbed him and pushed him in the back seat where I was. Michael was facing back at John, trying to smack him, and John had his arms up to try to stop him from doing that. We went under the Spaghettiville Bridge.
Brown says they drove up a dirt road to the vacant lot and pulled over.
And we got him outside the car.
Who pushed John out of the car?
I did. I thought they were just going to slap him around.
What happened next?
Then Michael and Walter wrestled John, tripped him up and got him on the ground.
Brown testified that he and Shelley held John McCabe down while Ferreira tied him up.
Michael tied his ankles, then went around and tied his wrists together. Then he took another piece of rope around his ankles and attached it up to his neck. They had put tape on his mouth. John's squirming, wiggling, trying to get out. He's lying on his belly with his legs up in the air and his head turned sideways. Then they said that this will teach you to mess with Marla anymore. And we got in the car and left.
Brown says they drove around, drinking beer for a while.
Then I told them that we should go back and let him go.
Brown says they eventually returned to the lot.
Michael and Walter got out of the car and went over to him. They were there for about 30 to 45 seconds, and they came quickly back to the car. We started to drive off, and one of them said that he wasn't breathing.
John McCabe had died of strangulation.
I wonder what he thought of that night.
Then they brought me home.
What did you do?
I remember, I think I cried.
Brown says he kept the murder a secret for 41 years because he was afraid of Michael Ferreira.
Michael said, if anybody talks to anybody about this, I'll kill him.
Alan Brown's a friggin' liar, and I mean, they know that. According to the prosecutor, he's been to Iraq and Afghanistan 5 tours. Maybe he's got something wrong in his head.
They talk about these people that give false confessions. Either he did it with somebody else or by himself, or he is really a messed up human being.
My sense of Edward Brown was he was easily led.
Eric Wilson, Michael Ferrera's attorney, believes that police pressured Edward Allen Brown because he was someone they could force into confessing to a crime he did not commit. They also offered him a deal: no jail time.
Edward Brown did not walk into Lowell Police Department headquarters and say, look, I got to get this off my chest. After being interrogated by trained detectives over the course of many days, he was faced with the threat of spending the rest of his life in jail, or he could tell the police what they wanted to hear.
Walter Shelley and Mike Ferrera picked you up at your house at 10:30, right?
Yes.
The question that I had to answer for the jury is, why would he tell them that if he didn't do it?
Did you think you could do that? That's a tough sell.
It was a tough sell, but Ed Brown gave me a lot to work with.
You were fed information it was a dirt lot, right?
Yes.
Over the course of 2 days, Ferrera's attorney grilled Brown relentlessly.
And in your 4 or 5 trial prep sessions.
Until Brown admitted that the prosecution had fed him parts of his story.
You were fed information that it was near a railroad tower, right?
Yes.
And you're being told that Shelley was jealous over Marla Shiner, right?
Yes.
There are certain pieces of information that an investigator may provide to someone who they're interviewing to see whether or not they know anything about that, to see whether or not it jogs their memory.
Well, but couldn't that also be a way of telegraphing to the witness what you want him to say?
Well, in this case, that didn't have to happen because Brown was the one who talked about the rope, the tape, the binding of John.
However Brown got his story, Wilson claims it cannot be true because it does not fit the evidence. In fact, in the 1969 police reports, detectives noted that they were unable to find any evidence of a scuffle.
There was no suggestion anywhere around John McCabe's body or the scene that that struggle described by Edward Brown ever took place.
Why would Edward Allen Brown lie and implicate himself so directly in what happened unless it was the truth?
Your testimony has not always been 10:30, has it?
Wilson thought it was not enough to try to discredit Brown. He also had to punch holes in the alleged motive, jealousy over a girl. He'll do it by calling that girl,
my name is Marla Shiner,
to the witness stand.
That you would have known each other from being in the same age.
Mr. Brown, you've lied under oath when you're scared, right?
Yes.
You've lied under oath when you're nervous, right?
Yes.
You've lied under oath when you're frightened, right?
Correct.
Prosecutors had a problem with their star witness, Edward Allen Brown. He seemed to wither under strong cross-examination from the defense.
You still can't get your facts straight, can you?
No.
So prosecutor Tom O'Reilly called Detective Linda Coughlin to counter accusations that she'd forced Edward Allen Brown to confess and fed him details.
At any point, did you feed him information as to the investigation?
never.
But Eric Wilson says Coughlin also had tunnel vision and ignored evidence of other suspects.
There were a number of investigative reports and material that you either overlooked or didn't even know about. True?
I don't know what you're referring to.
How about Richard Santos?
Richard Santos was flagged in this Tewksbury police report as a suspect in the McCabe murder in 1974. Santos was arrested for committing a crime eerily similar to John McCabe's murder.
This young woman was abducted on Route 38. Her feet were bound, her hands were tied behind her back, her mouth was duct taped, and her eyes were taped shut.
All of the facts that surround Santos as a possible subject lead you to be suspicious, but there was never anything tying him to motive, opportunity, means.
Information on Richard Santos.
Still, the judge allowed the jury to hear about Santos and another suspect.
With respect to Robert Morley.
Robert Morley, a local 25-year-old who reportedly knew both Ferrera and Shelley and was suffering from mental illness.
He was labeled, long before you were assigned this case, as a strong suspect, right?
There is a report that uses the word for him, strong suspect, and the very same report mentions Mr. Ferreira as a prime suspect.
But it's how Morley became a strong suspect that makes him so interesting. Police learned about him shortly after the crime from his own brothers.
Well, Morley's own brothers went in and said that they thought he might have been involved in it.
Yeah, they thought he might have.
Former DA Jerry Leone says Morley's brothers were mistaken.
I think what happens in matters like this is people will say, sure, you should take a look at X or Y because they have a profile of somebody who would do something like this, and they were around the area at the time. But then you have to look at the evidence and see whether or not the evidence leads you to believe that they had anything to do with it.
Do the brothers have any specific evidence that you're aware of?
They did not.
He split to Florida the day after he was questioned by police. Mr. Morley, years later, in my estimate, committed suicide.
You learned of his death, his suicide, right? He jumped off a bridge, right?
His brother says he fell off a bridge.
The defense also tried to punch holes in the alleged motive for the murder and called a surprising witness to do it.
Yes, my name is Marla Shiner, and my spelling of my last name is S-H-I-N-E-R. Thank you.
Marla Shiner, the girl who Walter Shelley and Mike Ferreira allegedly killed for. Edward Allen Brown had just testified that Marla was Shelley's girlfriend in September of '69, and Shelley was jealous because John was flirting with her. But Marla says John never flirted with her.
Did you ever go to a dance with John McCabe?
Never.
Did it ever convey to you that he had any type of romantic interest in you in August or September of 1969?
None.
The McCabes say it doesn't matter if the flirting was real or imagined.
She could have been just stopped and said hello to John. And Shelley could have walked by and seen it, and he's going to explode.
Next, Marla threw the prosecution a curveball.
September 26, 1969, were you dating Walter Shelley?
No. I was not dating Walter when John McCabe died.
When did you start dating him then?
I believe it was after that death.
How old were you?
13?
You were 13, September 69.
Oh, I don't know. I can't do the math right here.
But according to police, Marla told them she was dating Shelley at the time and was just 12 years old when they started seeing each other.
You didn't tell the police that you were dating Walter Shelley? In 1969 when John McCabe was killed?
No, I don't believe I did tell him that.
Why lie about dating someone unless it was because of her that John was murdered?
48 Hours had questions for Marla Shiner too, but she declined our request for an interview. Marla eventually married Walter Shelley, but it didn't last. She said he was very violent.
Miss Shiner, was Walter Shelley a jealous man?
Absolutely.
It appears that we're ready to proceed then.
Judge, at this point in time, the defendant would rest.
This was a hard-fought trial till the end, and then it was up to the jury to decide. Did Mike Ferreira help Walter Shelley kill John McCabe over a girl? Or was Edward Allen Brown telling a story the prosecution wanted to hear? It only took jurors 5 hours to decide.
I told Michael that we had to hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst, and he was ready for that.
May I have the verdict slip, please?
For the McCabe family, more than 4 decades of waiting and working came down to this moment.
What did you think the verdict was going to be?
Guilty. My God, he was guilty. If for no other reason, he was there.
It's hard to understand how the jury could, anticipate otherwise.
Bill McCabe was too nervous and too sick to sit in the courtroom that day, so he waited in another room while Evelyn and their daughters heard the verdict.
What say you to this indictment, ma'am? Is the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
Not guilty. Everyone, including Mike Ferreira, was so stunned, it took a while to sink in.
When the verdict came in, when you heard that that Ferreira had been acquitted?
I had to go tell my husband that.
Were you afraid to tell him?
Yes.
Why?
I was afraid he was going to die.
Tragically, Evelyn was right. Just 4 days after the verdict, Bill McCabe's heart gave out and he gave up.
What do you think killed your husband?
Stress. The stress of the trial.
While Evelyn McCabe laid her husband to rest next to their son, the DA's office had a decision to make. After losing the case against Mike Ferreira, would it go ahead with the trial of Walter Shelley?
There goes Jack, there goes Jim, down to Lover's Lane. All the girls are singing love songs, all the boys sing Adeline. Those wedding bells are breaking.
I still don't believe Bill's gone. I can still hear him snore in the night. And then I feel the bad he's not there.
Evelyn McCabe was determined to honor her husband's dying wish.
He laid in the hospital bed, and I says, I'll pick up and take over for you.
She'd see to it someone would pay for John's murder.
The jurors find Michael Ferreira not guilty.
Watching Michael Ferreira go free was tough for some jurors, too.
So how hard was it for you to acquit him?
It was very difficult.
One of the jurors, Michael Duquette, says the biggest problem was Edward Allen Brown.
The plan was to teach him a lesson for messing with Marla.
Did the majority of the jurors believe him?
No.
Why not?
They just felt that he was not telling the truth.
I thought they were just going to slap him around. And
they felt that he had been fed information, and that didn't make a ton of sense to me. Maybe he wasn't the best witness, but I just can't see somebody saying, I did it, when they didn't do it.
Duquette came to believe Brown and wanted to find Michael Ferreira guilty of something, but the only choices the jurors had were first and second degree murder.
So what did you want to convict him of?
Manslaughter, and it wasn't an option.
We are extremely pleased with the jury's verdict.
Despite the Ferreira loss, prosecutors decided to try to convict the other suspect in the murder, Walter Shelley.
The acquittal in the Ferreira case didn't do anything to lessen our belief that we had the right people who were responsible for killing John McCabe.
All rise.
September 3rd, 2013, 7 months after Michael Ferreira's acquittal,
This murder is about John McCabe.
it was Walter Shelley's turn to stand trial. Shelley was 17 the night of John's murder. He's now 61, remarried, and has lived quietly in Tewksbury ever since, just a few miles from Evelyn McCabe.
Walter Shelley is sitting on the small of his back, holding the hands down.
If convicted of first-degree murder, Shelley could spend the rest of his life in prison.
They wrestle him to the ground.
It was the same case prosecutors presented against Michael Ferreira, the same motive,
jealousy,
and the same evidence,
the ropes that came off the victim's body,
presented by the same witnesses, Marla Shiner, Detective Linda Coughlin, and once again, the state's star witness, Edward Allen Brown.
I heard one of them say, he's not breathing.
Was it any easier to sit through the second trial?
No, I want to say it was harder. Dad wasn't there for backup.
You were called a liar repeatedly.
Yes, I was.
Brown seemed less rattled this time, more confident, and the McCabes allowed themselves to hope.
I can keep my fingers, my toes, everything crossed.
During closing arguments, the defense called Brown a liar.
He'll tell you whatever you want to hear.
But the prosecution argued that Brown would never implicate himself in a crime he did not commit.
What did he confess for? He was talked into it?
A week-long trial went to the jury. This would be the McCabes' last chance to see someone held accountable for killing John.
We had faith that the jury was going to come with the right answer this time.
Finally, 2 days later, a verdict.
Person, has your jury agreed upon its verdict?
Yes, we have.
Pass the verdict slip forward, please.
Walter Shelley's wife and family waited nervously. Evelyn McCabe couldn't bring herself to even sit in the courtroom and had to wait outside.
She couldn't hear another not guilty.
May the verdicts be recorded, Your Honor.
She was scared she was going to drop dead.
Charging the defendant, Walter Shelley, with the offense of murder. What say, was the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty. Murder first
Guilty of what?
degree. First degree.
Guilty and life behind bars for Walter Shelley. This jury believed Brown.
So when you heard guilty, do you remember the first thing you thought?
I thought my father would be proud. We got one of them.
It was the final twist in a mystery filled with them. For the same crime and on the same evidence, one man walked free, one man went to prison.
Hey, John, guess what? We got him. Billy, it turned out beautifully.
He didn't live to write about it, but Bill McCabe finally got the end he was looking for to the story he wrote about John's life and death. A story that took 4 decades to play out.
He was 15 years, 6 months, and 2 weeks.
About his boy, who will be 15 years, 6 months, and 2 weeks old forever.
Please, John. Please take good care of him until I get there. Please, and then I will.
CBS Next. A stepdaughter's trust betrayed.
She found naked photos of herself on her stepdad's computer. Hundreds.
Then Tom Merriman is found dead. Was it revenge?
Did you want your stepfather dead?
48 Hours Crime Time Double Feature continues next on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.